From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lines, I'm Joe Matthew.
Congress returns to Washington after a 6-week recess to debate government funding. The deadline on a possible government shutdown only 3 weeks away.
This as House Republicans unveil a scathing report on the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. We'll talk about it all with Republican Congressman Greg Murphy, the swing state of North Carolina.
The presidential candidates, meanwhile, prepare for tomorrow's debate, as new polling shows the race statistically tied nationally. We'll discuss the stakes and the down-ballot effects with Erin Covey of the Cook Political Report. Well, good to see you on a Monday in Washington. Of course, it is debate eve, but it is also return day for Congress after what felt like a very long summer break, because it was indeed an extended one. A
6-week summer recess. The members prefer we call it the home district work period. They were working, and by that we mean running. Kaylee, they all have races to worry about, and they'll probably get out of town as quick as they can after they settle the funding matter. So here we are again with the countdown clocks at the ready, Kaylee, in a debate to fund the government, which, by the way, runs out of money on the 30th of this month.
And, of course, the House is going to take the opening shot here with a continuing resolution that would extend until March with the SAVE Act attached, which, of course, would make illegal something that already is non-citizens voting in the U.S. election. It's going nowhere in the Senate, and the White House doesn't like it either.
That's right. If it should get to the White House, it won't go any further than that. Karine Jean-Pierre, the press secretary, made that clear at the briefing today.
House Republicans should stop wasting time. I've said this many times before, repeat it at this podium, and to do their jobs for the American people by keeping the government open. It is a simple job. It's their number one job as Congress, is to keep the government open, and we believe it should be with a short-term CR.
Joining us now are Bloomberg's Saleha Mohsin and Bloomberg's Texas Bureau Chief Julie Fine. So we find ourselves here again. Lady Saleha, I'll begin with you. It is an open fact, not just because of the veto threat from the White House, but it is already known that this bill the House is going to pass, this continuing resolution, won't get through the Senate. So why are we doing this whole song and dance again?
This is what we do. This is how governing happens in Washington, D.C. We saw Mike Johnson throw out his opening salvo. We saw Hakeem Jeffries treat it as an opening salvo. But you're right. Everyone just wants to get back to their races, make sure the down ballot really counts, keep their donors interested, keep their voters engaged. And they're trying to show that they can govern a little bit and show that we can horse trade. And when one side says, I want too much, and we can kind of talk them off the ledge. So it's also just kind of showing voters the most recent example of winning in negotiations.
So we've all seen this movie before. Kaylee, I don't know how many times we've gone through this in 2024. I guess I'm losing count here. And it always seems to end the same way after everyone, as I mentioned, gets the countdown clocks running and we have a last-minute freak out here. Julie Fine, what's different this time, if only the fact that we've got an election looming? Does that provide some insurance, knowing lawmakers don't want to go home to talk about shutting down the government?
Not only do lawmakers not want to go home to talk about shutting down the government, lawmakers don't want to go home with a shut down government. So obviously, it's very clear they are going to figure something out, and they have to figure it out in the next 3 weeks. So I think that's what's slightly different this time. You really kind of know that it's not going to end with a shutdown. So what it appears to be to many is just a waste of time to get to something we all know they are getting to.
Well, and of course, the negotiations on Capitol Hill are not the only thing we're paying attention to this week. We are all awaiting tomorrow night the debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. It will take place, Julie, on ABC. Going into it, we know, based on the new New York Times Siena poll, that this is a dead heat race. Donald Trump leading Harris by 1 point nationally, though that is within the margin of error. So who are the stakes higher for tomorrow night?
Well, I think that the stakes are almost slightly higher for Kamala Harris because it is the first time that they have seen her debate Donald Trump. If you remember, you have seen President Biden debate Donald Trump in the past. So it'll be interesting to see how she approaches that. However, for the former president, you look at how well he did in the last debate comparatively. So it is a big night for him. People, however, will also be looking to see how he reacts to her. So a big night for both of them. But again, for Kamala Harris, the first time she has faced off with Donald Trump. And in fact, the first time they will meet in person.
It is, and remarkable to think that Donald Trump has been a part of more general election debates, presidential general election debates, than any candidate in American history. Isn't that something? When you think about this is the third time around now. So with that said, what does his experience mean for her preparation? They're taking very different paths here. She's hunkered down in Pittsburgh doing mock debates. He's out riffing with friends and the media. Knowing that he's done this that many times, she's never done this before, means what for her?
Joe, that's a fascinating fact. Eyebrows raised. I had no idea about that. I'm quite surprised.
It was John Carl, by the way, who said that yesterday, and my eyebrows raised the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to see Kamala Harris meet Trump. It's going to happen before our eyes. They're going to meet for the first time, shake hands for the first time ever. That's also rare. Yeah. We're seeing Harris prepare methodically, like a student, like she did in law school, as a prosecutor, and Trump is a chaos agent, where there are no rules. Kamala Harris is used to the rules. Donald Trump is not used to the rules. He likes to go against the grain and surprise you. So I think if she's never met him, she doesn't know what it's like, his height, his build, his demeanor on stage, which really, I think there were some interesting moments between him and Hillary Clinton in 2016. And he has so much experience, like you're saying, not just presidential debates, but just across the spectrum, right? He debated Hillary Clinton as well, and that is a formidable opponent.
Well, of course, that all speaks to the kind of performance aspect of all of this. It also, though, theoretically should be about policy, even if that's not what ultimately for the American voter it is about. We saw the Harris campaign finally putting a policy platform up on the website. It includes things going beyond what she'd already proposed, like no tax on tips, now suggesting there should be no sub-minimum wage for workers who are receiving tips. How much further should we expect both of these candidates, frankly, to be fleshing out specific policy details on that stage tonight?
I kind of wonder if Trump's economic policy speech on Thursday and Harris putting out more paper and having more dedicated speeches to the issue in the last 10 days is sort of a way to get everything, all the new information out there a little bit early. And let's see if the moderator or the two candidates themselves can pull new information from each other. The interesting thing is where they overlap, because they both actually represent economic populism. Regardless of who you vote for, all policies are populist policies.
And I suspect that Donald Trump will accuse Kamala Harris of stealing the no taxes on tips, as it did come a day or two later. What's your thought on that, Julie? How detailed do these candidates need to be tomorrow night? Or are we missing the show business element here when we're asking questions like that?
I think they will have to be as detailed as the questions they are asked. I think when they are having their discussion and their answers, that will be basically ideas and what they think is important. I think that one, in one respect, is really on the moderators. How specific are they going to be when it comes to their policies? One thing I did think that was very interesting about looking at the vice president's website is talking about how Congress must pass a bipartisan border bill. So there you're sort of getting an inkling that she's already ready to fight back about him saying she's not tough on the border. She already has her argument ready that, wait, hey, Congress tried to do this and the Republicans turned it down. So I think you're going to see a lot of ideas tomorrow night. The specifics, I think, are going to be based on how specific the questions are.
I guess no mystery, Kaylee, why that policy page showed up on the Harris campaign website. Bloomberg's Saleha, Mohsin, Julie Fine, great conversation and great reporting. Thank you both. Coming up, Congress indeed back in session this week, and we'll take a hard look at what's at the top of the agenda, beginning, of course, with funding the government. Republican Congressman Greg Murphy of North Carolina is with us next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
words of a very great but highly underrated president, William McKinley, I am a tariff man standing on a tariff platform, and we will keep the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency, and it is currently under major siege. Many countries are leaving the dollar. You're not going to leave the dollar with me. I'll say, you leave the dollar. You're not doing business with the United States because we're going to put 100% tariff on your goods.
Former President Trump over the weekend at a campaign rally in Wisconsin, another swing state, floating the idea of 100% tariffs on countries that turn away from the dollar. Earlier today, Republican Congressman French Hill of Arkansas reacted to Donald Trump's comments. You're on Bloomberg.
I think it's President Trump having a good time at a rally. Because back when William McKinley was president, of course, we financed the whole federal government through tariffs. That was the principal source of federal revenue. I don't think that's a relevant issue. I think the biggest risk to the dollar, being the principal reserve currency of the world, is really our own fiscal situation.
Joining us now, Republican Congressman Greg Murphy of North Carolina, live from Capitol Hill, where the lights are back on. Congressman, welcome back to Washington. It's good to see you, and welcome back to Bloomberg. If French Hill is right there and fiscal policy is the problem, what do you want to hear from Donald Trump tomorrow night? Proposing, of course, to extend the 2017 Trump-era tax cuts, in part without explaining exactly how to pay for it, other than we'll grow out of it. And most credible economists have told us that's inflationary. Do you want more details on the pay-fors tomorrow?
Yeah, I do. One of the things that we learned after 2017, really in 2018, when the tax cuts went into effect, is the fact that it did grow the economy. We had so many businesses that reinvested what savings that they had. And if you look at curves, it did grow. Is it enough? Probably not. But also cutting the absolute out-of-control spending that we've seen in the last 3.5 years will hopefully be pay-fors in a way. But fiscal responsibility is critical. And so we're having to get back down to as what Representative Hill said. This is where America's economy and where our debt really matters to the rest of the world.
Well, Congressman, as we consider the estimates of what making the tax cuts permanent and the collective tax policies that Donald Trump has proposed on the campaign trail, estimates range to the tune of about $10.5 trillion over the next 10 years. That is more than all non-defense discretionary spending is projected to cost. So if it is spending cuts, how drastic do those realistically need to be? And is there, frankly, appetite to do it?
Well, I think there will be. Obviously, tax cuts come through, Ways and Means, spending cuts come through every different appropriations. I think we really need to get back to serious government. Just because it sounds like a good program, and I have to deal with this sometimes with my own constituents asked, is it a great program? Yes, but does the federal government necessarily need to be involved? No. There's some here in Washington, D.C., really on the progressive left, feel that the federal government needs to fund everything. We need to get away from that philosophy and understanding where we need to fund things. Our military obviously needs more funding and needs to be in a stronger stature faced with the Chinese threat that we have worldwide. But I think we have a fiscal day of reckoning coming sooner than later about where this country is and where our debt structure needs to be.
Of course, you're going to deal with the matter of spending before we get to any of this, with the government set to run out of funding on the 30th of September. Congressman, your speaker is putting forth a stopgap solution that appears to be upsetting folks on both sides of the aisle. Members of the Republican Freedom Caucus say they don't want any short-term solution. Democrats don't like this idea of the SAVE Act being attached. In fact, the White House today even said that it would veto this piece of legislation, suggesting that it is a solution in search of a problem. It's already illegal for non-citizens to vote in this country. Is this a waste of time to go through this exercise right now, or are previous analysts who are on right? This is just the way we do business here in Washington.
Well, I think it's a little bit of both, John. You know, the SAVE Act is something that needs to be reaffirmed. I mean, we have places in this country that are absolutely making it easier for people illegally, whether they know it or not, to vote in this federal election. It's being pushed by the progressive left. There's no doubt about that. As far as CRs, I'm not crazy about them. But here we are faced with a situation that we were only able to get 5 of 12 appropriation bills across because of a lot of obstructionism by some members of our party. So, no, I'm not crazy about this. this. It's difficult for our military to fund things and plan things, but we're faced with a situation that we have to fund the government. The SAVE Act, I think, is a great idea to go forward. And if people want to stand in the way, then they need to get out of the way of what we need to do for the government.
But do you think, sir, that 6 months, a 6-month continuing resolution is the appropriate time frame? Why not actually try to get those remaining 7 appropriation bills done in this Congress before a new one sits in January?
Well, Kayleigh, it just goes to the fact we don't have time. We're pushed up on a time crunch. Yes, in an ideal world, love to have 12 out of 12 funded. But we're at a point where we're not going to be able to do this. We need to fund the government. I will never vote for a shutdown. It's absolutely irresponsible, in my opinion, to do. But that said, let us do a short term. Let us get into March, and let's figure out who the president is going to be. I have my own favorite. And then we can actually work backwards from where we are in March.
Congressman, it's Joe again here. I know that there's a lot of talk about China this week as part of the House Republican Conference's agenda with a number of hearings that have been put forth here. I just want to ask you what your thoughts are at this point about TikTok, remembering there was a divest or ban law that came to fruition a couple of months ago, yet we continue to see TikTok advertising, and even heard from the former president on this, Donald Trump, on Truth Social, using TikTok, of course, on his campaign, just like Democrats have been doing. For all those, he says, who want to save TikTok in America, he writes, vote for Trump. The other side is closing it up. But now I'm a big star on TikTok. We even have TikTok Jack, and we're setting records. We're not doing anything with TikTok, he says, but the other side is going to close it up. Is he speaking for Republicans there?
I don't quite know. I think that's political talk in a way because, hell, if the Democrats were jumping on TikTok and pushing it forward, it's only fair for Republicans to do that. That said, the TikTok, the operators, the whole agency system within this, Joe, is something that is controlled by the CCP. They're gathering information on all Americans who use this platform. And I think there will be a day of reckoning where that does need to either go away or be completely reformed. And yes, politics are politics and campaigns are campaigns. I do think this will have to have an eventual change in their activity and their platform itself for TikTok.
Well, finally, on politics and the campaigns, Congressman, in your home state of North Carolina, there is a sense, based on polling, that it has gotten a lot tighter between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. What is it going to take to keep North Carolina red as it has been since 2008?
I think what's going to be important, and it has gotten a lot closer since Biden left, or was pushed out, rather. I think it's going to be about policy. And we've had a lot of folks move into North Carolina since the last election. Most of them, I think, are conservative. But you have to get rid of the rhetoric, which is always part of campaigns. Kamala is pushing out 2025, which was never part of the Republican platform whatsoever. And you have to get back to policy. What do you want? Do you want policy like it's been for the last 3.5 years, where domestically inflationary problems, where the world were a joke as far as our international reputation? Or do you want to get back to where things were good for Americans? And I think when you come down where it's point blank policy compared to policy, I think the Trump campaign wins. I think Republicans win because that's what I believe most people care about. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago, 5 years ago, or are you worse? And I think that resonates mostly with North Carolinians.
Well, I guess we'll see how much Donald Trump and Kamala Harris focus on policy tomorrow night on that debate stage in Philadelphia. Republican Congressman Greg Murphy of North Carolina, thank you so much for joining us, sir. Appreciate your time. Now, coming up, we'll take a look at Apple's Glow Time event in Cupertino, how investors are reacting to the new product launches. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
The innovation and invention these products deliver will continue to deepen the meaningful impact they have on all of our lives. I'm proud of our teams and what they've accomplished, and I can't wait for you to experience these amazing products.
Tim Cook earlier today. Apple's stock is up after market following The big reveal today of the iPhone 16, and the tech company, of course, also unveiled the incorporation of AI, Apple Intelligence, and a new version of the Apple Watch and AirPods. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow has been live all day in Cupertino and is joining us now here on Bloomberg TV and radio. So, Ed, we got a suite of new products. We knew a lot of what was going to be in them, thanks to our colleagues like Mark Gurman. But where are the big takeaways from this? Is it all about AI?
It is all about AI, but the big takeaway is probably that Apple Intelligence is not quite there yet. The moment that the keynote finished, I was able to rush into the display room and get hands-on with the new generation of iPhone 16s, particularly the Pro and Pro Max. And they're very nice, very shiny. To all intents and purposes, they look the same as the iPhone 15 generation or Pro generation. But in demoing Apple Intelligence, it's really basic stuff. You're talking about quick summarization of dense bodies of text or auto responses to emails. There is some sort of advanced photo editing capabilities that come with Apple Intelligence. Siri looks a bit different. It has a refreshed interface. But these are kind of value add or improvement tools to things that you can already do with your phone. And I think we'll still be waiting a bit longer to find out the full story for Apple Intelligence.
Well, so does that speak to the reaction on Wall Street, Ed? Apple stock is barely positive right now in after-hours trading. It spent the bulk of the day in the red.
Right.
But we also know that Apple stock doesn't always perform real well on days like these.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a real technology nerd, but I'm also a student of history. And, in 12 of the 17 iPhone launch days prior to today, the stock closes down. It's a sell the news event. So I guess one way of looking at it is that the stock closing flat or modestly higher and being up in post-market is a positive sign. But Kayleigh makes a good point that we actually knew a lot of what we were going to see anyway. It's going to be really interesting that I found myself during the Top Live blog reflecting on the idea that the basics really matter to the consumer. The iPhone 16 generations have the best battery life ever. The processor is improved. The cameras are better. They aren't wholesale changes, but they're things that matter in markets all around the world. And that might just be enough to get Apple into an upgrade cycle.
Ed, we have less than a minute left, but on the other products, the sleep apnea detector on the watch, a hearing aid in the AirPods, this is medical technology too.
Yeah, the response, particularly from the retail investor or the technology enthusiast, really of substance around that. The sleep apnea detection and, literally FDA standard hearing aid support in AirPods. That's more evidence of Apple moving into that health and medical services field. But also, as we discussed, as the fighter jets fly overhead, they're doing battle in a wearables market where jewelry is a big sort of factor here, the premium products, particularly in markets like China.
This from Cupertino, Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow. Thanks for all the help today, Ed, on this big rollout. Coming up, we'll take a look at tomorrow night's debate once again and how this might impact down-ballot races. Erin Covey from Cook is next on Bloomberg.
No, I'm not crazy about this. It's difficult for our military to fund things and plan things, but we're faced with a situation that we have to fund the government. The SAVE Act, I think, is a great idea to go forward. And if people want to stand in the way, then they need to get out of the way of what we need to do for the government.
Republican Congressman Greg Murphy just moments ago here on Balance of Power talking about the top of the agenda as Congress returns this week, and that would be avoiding a government shutdown. Joining us now, our signature panel. Rick Davis is here, Stone Court Capital partner, and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University, senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. They are both Bloomberg Politics contributors, and nice to see you. Lawmakers are back in town. Maybe you actually had to wait a minute in traffic today. We're getting back to reality here, and we've seen this movie before. I think we've established today, Kayleigh, the conventional wisdom is the election will ensure the government does not shut down because lawmakers need to go home to run for re-election. Is that fair to say?
It is. And it's also fair to say that it would be stupid for them to shut down the government, not only because they have to go home, but because how can you convince people that you can run the government if indeed you're in charge as Republicans and you're shutting it down, or Democrats? So it would not be good politics. But that said, they also have to figure out how to do this CR. So, sometimes what's in their best interest isn't what they end up doing. So let's all hope that they do what's both politically advantageous and in the interest of the U.S. government.
Well, as we consider what this specific CR is, 6 months, this would take us to March, keeping funding levels steady. It would also include the SAVE Act, which makes it illegal for non-citizens to vote, except that already is illegal. And Democrats aren't going to go for this. It's already been established, as seen in the veto by the White House, Rick. So what is the point, if you're Speaker Mike Johnson, of even trying to attach the SAVE Act to this? Does it really send that strong of a political message that it's worth wasting a week on?
Yeah, it's just performative politics. And, at some point, you just got to get so tired of it in the House of Representatives. We see it all the time. And just think about this. And the congressman mentioned it. We're going to delay the increases in the defense budget that are critical to our national security so that we can pass a law that already exists and delay the budgeting process, which, by the way, the House was actually on a pretty good track to get FY25 done, and all of that for nothing. 6 months in last year's budget levels so that, domestic and national security agencies cannot plan.
We'll be halfway through the fiscal year in March. What's the point at that point?
That assumes we actually pass a budget at that point.
Sure.
Right. We'll see about that.
Right.
But this is why the Freedom Caucus is also squawking, right? It's not just Democrats that don't want this. There are a lot of conservative Republicans in the House don't want to kick the can for 6 months, Jeannie.
Yeah, that's right. And Massey said that. And, it is sound fiscal policy that we should get on-time budgets. You do not budget by CR, which both sides have been doing for far too long. And I think this is one of the frustrating things is that my guess is we hear nothing about this in the big debate tomorrow night. I don't suspect that either Harris or Trump will be asked about this kind of issue. It's not on my bingo sheet. So, if it is, I'll be very thrilled. But this is something that should be addressed in our government, which is passing a budget on time, regardless of who is in control. And obviously, that's not going to happen this time. And you don't want to have it for 6 months, at least many people who think about fiscal policy and budgeting, because that means we'll get those automatic cuts. And that is really devastating to so many agencies.
Well, and you also have to consider the next president is inaugurated on January 20th. So it's 6 weeks later that they're suddenly going to be faced with a funding deadline? Is that, regardless of who wins, Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, something that an incoming new president wants to waste political capital on that early in a term?
Yeah, it's pretty irresponsible. And we can cross our fingers and hope that a new president is sworn in on January 20th.
Well,
the pace we're headed on, I'm not giving it too much confidence. But the bottom line is, you're right. I mean, you don't need a new administration that's under the gun to present a budget for the next year to be wrestling with Congress over the budget for last year. I mean, remember, the budget expires at the end of September. And so we're going to go another 6 months past that, without the directed funding that was hard fought by all these special interests to get into the budget this last time.
This is something we talked about earlier today, Kayleigh, with Mick Mulvaney on with us on the earlier edition of Balance of Power, former White House acting chief of staff, also former member of Congress, what he had to say about Republicans in the House pushing for a short-term bill.
Put yourself in the Republican shoes in the House, right? We've only got one branch of government right now. We think we're going to take the Senate. We've got a 50-50 chance of taking the White House. So why cut a whole year-long deal now when you can sort of take the chance, you get past the next election and maybe get a little bit better deal?
You like the logic?
I do. I mean, I think that does make sense. Now here's the question. There is some concern amongst House Republicans in particular about fundraising, where they are in polling. Does this suggest that maybe they're not as confident as they should be? Because you would think that logic would carry the weight if they felt pretty certain that they were going to keep the House.
There also is the question here on the calculus of keeping the House and the Senate. If you're a Democrat, knowing that Tom Massey, who you mentioned, a number of other Freedom Caucus members whose Joe has alluded to, are going to vote no on any continuing resolution. It will require Democratic votes to get over the finish line. Do you expect that Hakeem Jeffries will direct his caucus, everyone vote for this, or is it going to be a few fringe members who are in those districts who cross the line?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're waiting to see. It's hard to tell. So far, Hakeem Jeffries, obviously not in a presidential election cycle, has been able to hold the caucus together, and he has done a fabulous job doing that. So you'd have to say, based on his record, he will do the same. That said, we haven't seen him in action in a presidential election year where, to your point, you've got Democrats in some tough districts out there. And also you had, 5 Democrats vote for the SAVE Act in the past. Yep. That's another element of this that's out there as well. And so if that may give, somebody like Mike Johnson some more wiggle room. But that's going to be a test for Hakeem Jeffries, who so far has done a very good job holding Democrats.
All right, coming up, Rick and Jeannie will stay with us here with more. They'll be back later this hour as we return with a conversation with the Cook Political Report's Erin Covey. Will be with us to dig into the potential down-ballot effects of tomorrow night's debate. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We have done a lot of research, not just in this election cycle, but in past election cycles around voters, women voters in particular. And I can tell you that reproductive freedom, as it has been since the Dobbs decision, is going to be a determinative issue in this election. For women, young women in particular, this is a deal breaker issue for them.
That was Jessica Mackler, president of Emily's List, on the early edition of Balance of Power today, discussing the issue of reproductive rights, as the latest New York Times Siena poll finds Kamala Harris with a 15-point advantage on abortion. Joining us now for more here on Bloomberg TV and radio is Erin Covey. She's analyst at the Cook Political Report and is here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. So, Erin, obviously, this is something we could probably expect Kamala Harris is going to focus on heavily on the debate stage tomorrow night. But there's plenty of others, pro-reproductive rights Democrats, who are seeking office in the Senate, in the House as well. Is this the best winning issue right now for Democrats?
For Democrats, this is the best winning issue for them. And, we've seen recent polling that shows this is a top issue for voters. I believe in the latest Siena College poll, it was the second most driving issue for voters. And so, this is not an issue that pre-Dobbs was a motivating issue, particularly for swing voters. Yeah. For most Americans, it was the kind of thing that was more in the back of their mind and maybe more motivating for the base of both parties. But since the Dobbs decision, this has become a crucial issue. And, we see the economy and immigration continue to be top issues, particularly the economy. But this is the issue that Democrats are favored on. Voters still trust Republicans more to handle immigration and to the economy. But in terms of abortion issues and issues of reproductive access more generally, Democrats are favored.
Well, it's interesting. There are a couple of numbers that really underscore what you're saying. One of them from that Siena poll from over the weekend. Among young women, 18 to 29, in the 6 swing states they follow, in August, an astonishing 38-point advantage for Kamala Harris. You don't see numbers like that very often. Axios also included today the number of U.S. women registered to vote is typically 7 to 10 million more than the number of men, according to the Center for American Women and Politics. You put those together here. Is this why Donald Trump is having trouble crystallizing a message on abortion?
Yeah, I think so. And, we have seen largely across demographic subgroups, the gender gap has widened. It's not just with white voters, but also with black voters and Hispanic voters. We are seeing the voters that Trump is doing better with tend to be men across all subgroups. You just wonder if he keeps
a hard line on abortion. He cannot obviously win the female vote. And women, based on these numbers, will decide the election.
Well, and he has tried to moderate on the issue relative to where most of the Republican Party is at. And we have seen a lot of pro-life activists have expressed frustration with him because of that. And so I think that could matter for some swing voters, the fact that he has tried to differentiate himself and run to the center a little bit more on this issue and kind of just defer to the states. But this is clearly still a winning issue for Democrats. We're not just seeing Harris run on it. We're seeing Democrats running for House and Senate races and state legislative races. And we're also seeing the fact that this is going to be on the ballot directly in several states, which could be another driver of voter turnout. We saw, in the midterm cycle, the places that had abortion-related ballot initiatives, turnout was higher for Democratic and independent voters.
Well, as we're talking about some of those other candidates who aren't just the ones running for president, obviously there has been a narrative within the Democratic Party that the enthusiasm Kamala Harris has generated has translated to other candidates down the ballot. Have you actually changed your numbers specifically on what control of the House will look like? We've asked, for example, Susan DelBene, the chair of the DCCC, if she's changing her numbers, and they keep saying we only need 4. Is it going to be 4? Could it be materially more than 4 as you see it now?
It could be, but I think the most likely gain is still going to be in the single digits for either party. It's true, Democrats have the momentum right now in the House, but we still see at the end of the day that it's probably going to come down to a couple dozen races that are quite competitive and where neither party has a clear advantage. So we have recently moved 6 races in Democrats' favor in competitive districts, and we moved 2 races in Republicans' favor. So, largely that shows a little bit of a shift towards Democrats, but we still see neither party has a clear advantage. Currently, Democrats are favored in 203 races. Republicans are favored in 208 races. So that leaves 24 races in the toss-up category. So the momentum, obviously is helpful, particularly for fundraising. We have seen a huge burst in fundraising for down-ballot Democrats, and they were already outperforming Republicans in a lot of these races. So that is only going to continue to help.
Well, are you moving those races in the direction of Democrats, though, because of the Kamala Harris effect only, or should I say not Joe Biden at the top of the ticket?
Not Joe Biden is probably the better way to put it. Yes, I mean, we have seen, not just after the debate, but before the debate, Biden was trailing where he was in 2020 in these districts pretty significantly. There were districts that Biden carried by double digits in 2020 that he was tied with Trump in or even losing to Trump. So that would have had a detrimental effect on Democrats' ability to take back the House. Now we have seen Harris is coming close to or matching, or in a couple of cases actually even overperforming where Biden's 2020 margin was at in these districts. And that's really going to matter because control of the House really rests on the national environment. And if the national environment is better for Democrats, or at least even, that will help them significantly.
Well, as we consider the national environment, that often also means the economic environment, which is an area. And if you're looking at the New York Times Siena polling where you see the advantage for Harris, Donald Trump has a 13-point advantage on the issue of the economy. So especially as we consider these districts in which it is so close, in which it could be either way, as you're considering what toss-ups are. Is that actually at the end of the day where the unemployment rate is when people go to the polls? Is that going to be the deciding factor, not just potentially for the presidency, but for the balance of Congress?
It could be. And I think just largely cost of living in general has been a crucial issue for voters. And it's why, even if the economy is doing well by other indicators, we still see that Democrats are struggling to communicate to voters that they're a party that will be good for them on the economy. And so I think, we have seen, Democratic voters are talking a lot about abortion and about Trump in a lot of their ads, but we're also seeing them tackle cost of living issues because that is still the dominating issue for voters.
Interesting to see, Kayleigh, today gas prices at a 6-month low, potentially taking an issue away from Donald Trump tomorrow night. It's a great story on the terminal with regard to that. It may have nothing to do with Kamala Harris, but we could be below $3 a gallon on a national average at some point before this election. Erin Covey, great pleasure to have you back, analyst at the Cook Political Report. We thank you for being with us here on Bloomberg. Coming up, we'll look ahead at tomorrow's debate, how each candidate is preparing for the first matchup. Rick Davis, G.D. Shansena, back with us, our political panel on Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's going to be a dead heat, this race, so that's why every vote matters so much. Look, I think they will try and portray her as very liberal. They'll come back and say, I was a tough prosecutor. I put criminals behind bars. I'm a champion for small business. Donald Trump is a champion for big business and crony capitalism. I think she'll have to stay on offense to say she believes in the same American dream you do.
That was Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont, a surrogate for the Harris-Walz campaign, earlier today on Balance of Power, previewing tomorrow night's presidential debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Back with us, our political panel, our signature one at that, Rick Davis and Jeannie Sheehan Zaino, who, of course, will be with us for the debate tomorrow night as well here on Bloomberg TV and radio. So we come in to tomorrow with a bar somewhat already set by both campaigns, frankly, as Kamala Harris has been touting herself as a prosecutor who knows Donald Trump's type, and as Donald Trump essentially says ABC is a biased network, and he's questioning why he's doing the debate on there in the first place. Who has done a better job to this point of setting expectations for tomorrow, Rick?
Yeah, I actually don't think that Kamala Harris has done much expectation setting, right? I mean, she sort of put together her team and has been focused on debate prep, but there's been very little work in the ref. Not anything like Donald Trump, who, as you suggest, is out there talking about, I don't really do debate prep. And by the way, I'm going into the lion's den. These people at ABC, they hate me. I'm, had to, sue George Stephanopoulos. I mean, he just talks nonstop about the media. And by the way, been bashing the media again, talking to the enemy of the state when he's done his rallies. So he set up the conditions to fail. And who knows, maybe he'll meet those conditions. I mean, it's going to be interesting because when you look at all his debates, I mean, we've talked about how many he's had. He's never really had a good debate. He gets credit for winning the last debate because of the disastrous performance of the president. And so you take him in isolation, and he had a horrible debate. So I suspect we're going to see more of the Donald Trump from the June debate than anything else.
Well, I do wonder about the logic behind putting out surrogates on Sunday morning. The Trump campaign, in one particular case, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, on ABC this week, to talk about how poorly Kamala Harris would perform in the debate. She said Donald Trump is approaching the debate from a position of strength, she from a position of weakness. Why would you lower the bar for your opponent?
It's hard to know. I thought the same thing. It's important to have her out there. He is struggling with women. This is an elected governor who strongly supports him, a close ally. Yes, sure. But, that's pretty much politics 101.
Aren't you supposed to say what a fierce debater Kamala Harris
yes.
is? He's got his work cut out for him.
We don't know how he'll do all of that. So it was an odd choice on Sarah Huckabee Sanders' part, and I had the same reaction. Although part of me thinks, I don't know if I was her, if I'd go out and say Kamala Harris might do better than Trump, because that may be the last time she goes out. So maybe politics aside, she's got to feel his wrath if she goes the other way.
Well, of course, as we consider what they're trying to do on the stage tomorrow night, it's to reach a very small group of voters, the ones who haven't decided yet which one of them they'll be supporting. And frankly, a lot of people tuning in for the debate already know who they're going to vote for, right? That's more politically engaged people who are on the stage. So if it's coming down to a few voters in key swing states in particular, raises the question of what the winning message is going to be in southern states, for example, that Joe Biden didn't seem like he stood a real chance of winning. New Quinnipiac poll just out, Rick. North Carolina, Harris 49, Trump 46. 3-point difference. In Georgia, Trump is still up 49 to 45. But if you're the Trump campaign, seeing a poll like that on the eve of the debate, does it make you think differently about the kind of messaging you need to put there on the stage?
Yeah, look, I think the Trump campaign has had a lot of message challenges lately, right? I mean, they are trying to pivot inartfully away from Biden, which they seem to have a lot of good discipline around, and find their standing with Harris. And they went through this really awkward, first couple of weeks where Donald Trump just kept attacking her personally. Now, if he does that on the stage, he won't be talking to any voters. Even his own people don't want him to do that. So the question is, what is Donald Trump? What is his approach going to be? Is it going to be about leadership? Is it going to be on the issues? Is it going to be on the economy? If you look at his rallies and his activity leading up to this debate, there's no indication that they found a good sort of place for Donald Trump to be able to post up Harris, and he's going to, right? The only thing we know for sure is he's going to attack her. The question is it a personal attack or is it going to be on the issues? And we'll have to wait until tomorrow night to see.
That's for sure. Donald Trump is still calling her Comrade Kamala on Truth Social. He had quite a bit of time to talk about that in Wisconsin at his rally on Sunday night, in which he also threatened to jail people involved in unscrupulous behavior related to voting in the 2024 election. So this is rigged already.
According to Donald Trump, and that's nothing new. He's been making this case 2016, 2020, and now 2024. She's hoping he does. You missed my favorite word there, skullduggery. People engaged in skullduggery will face prosecution. That's a good word of the day. But yeah, this is the old Donald Trump playbook. And of course, what he really needs to do, to Rick's point, is he needs to tire to Joe Biden's very unpopular economic record. But that means he can't do his usual on the stump attacks. And so this is where we find ourselves, and I'm sure his team are holding their breath to see if he can focus on the economy and nothing else.
Is skullduggery the new malarkey? I don't know. I'm just glad Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are going to be with us. Our special coverage tomorrow evening here of the ABC News presidential debate. It starts 8 p.m. Eastern time here on Bloomberg TV and radio. We'll bring you the debate live and simulcast, and of course have the clutch analysis on both sides.
Indeed we will. So we'll see you for debate day tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.